Oh, I'm loud enough. Oh, okay, maybe I was loud enough to project without it. I'm gonna actually take a tool from Andy's playbook here and bring it on down, because I was thinking the same thing. That feels a bit far for me. So I'm just gonna come down a little bit closer to you and hope that my clicker works from down here. So thank you, my friend that's helping me out back there. Good evening. Good evening. It truly is exciting to be before you today. I honestly wish I had like 3 hours with you. I feel like I cannot remember the last time I've had an audience of pastors or people or leadership in ministry that I can get the opportunity to talk to, and I feel like there's so much I want to tell you, but they've given me 35 minutes, so it's not quite 3 hours. So I'm going to just pick a fraction of stuff that I would love to share with you. If you've been in like the tabling area, you've seen my pathetic little table, which is there, and that's because I can't man the table, so I don't have any really cool signs and everything. I just had to put up a couple little plasticky things with this picture in there, and you'll also see some cards on the table. Feel free to take one. There's a little bookmark on there with our different podcasts and things like that. I'll try and be back and forth there, but I have to get back to Atlanta tomorrow at some point. I'm not sure. I'm kind of having fun, so I might move my flight a little bit later into the afternoon. So we'll see what happens. But if not, please join me tomorrow morning as we talk about do a Bible study together. I'm going to focus in on mental health for that one in particular. And so the first thing I want to tell you all is just thank you. Thank you for what you do. Thank you for being my co-laborers in the faith. Thank you for shepherding a flock. We all have our callings, and I just thank you for being faithful in yours. I know it is not the most rewarding calling. You work really hard, you prepare a message, only to expect and know that on Monday morning, Betty Sue is going to email you and tell you what you got wrong and how you needed to rephrase this and how you needed to say this, right? And so it can be a thankless job and a very hard one. And so just thank you for what you do. I appreciate you, and just thank you for just giving me a chance to share with you tonight. As I mentioned to you earlier, an apologist is often, for me, it feels like I'm oftentimes caught in between the church and the culture. And as a result, my topics have changed over the years. I'm what's called a generalist, which means I go from topic to topic to topic. Some people just kind of do evidence for the resurrection or Bible credibility. I get severe boredom, really. And so I got to chase the latest thing that interests me. Now it's transgenderism and intersex. Who knows what it'll be next? But I kind of go from thing to thing to thing, kind of moving with the culture. But this particular question that I'm going to deal with you today on why I'm a Christian is actually a question that I get asked, have been doing since I first started out in apologetics. And this is an interesting question for me because the answer to this question has changed over time. Unusual for me to continuously morph and change and alter an answer so drastically. Several years ago, I would have gone with maybe a more evidential kind of approach. You know, the evidence is really great in archaeology. Obviously, the resurrection is a great clincher there. Maybe it would be something about talking about identity. It might be something about talking about it answers our longings and these kind of things, which I think are all still really good things. But I guess there's just new things that excite me, that keep me like, oh, I'm a Christian now because of these things that have added on to the current stack already. And what I want to share with you today are some of those things. I'll ruin it for you and tell you the ending and tell you really why I'm convinced of the case for Christianity. Multiple reasons, but what I'm going to focus on to you today is that I'm convinced that the case of Christianity needs to lie closer to home, both for the public, but also for me. And while the evidence is good, and it is good, we are blessed as Christians with an overabundance of evidence for Christianity in comparison to other belief systems. But my latest thing is, does Christianity actually work in our lives? Both mine and both in the non-believer who's seeking for an answer to something. Can this belief system, written 2,000 years ago, they like to say, meet me in 2024? Can it still connect with me? So I'm going to take you a little bit of journey back here, not too far, about 20 some odd years, and 9/11 happens. And after 9/11, President Bush, I believe, had made some reference to America being a Christian nation. That made a lot of people upset, specifically a group of atheists. And they said, this is not a Christian nation. Actually, we are here and you need to acknowledge us. And they formed what was called the New Atheism movement. Many of you have heard of this. This is different than traditional atheism, which was basically, someone who says, maybe I lack a belief in God, or I don't believe in God, or I believe there is no God, depending on what era we're talking about here. But what the New Atheists did is they changed the view and perception of religion. So in other words, religion is bad. It is evil. It makes people fly planes into buildings. And once we get rid of religion, the world will be a better place. We will all be good people. We will know how to treat other people. We will be kind, and we won't be so full of violence. We can create our own understanding, our own meaning. We can come up with our own moral systems. As a student at MIT recently told me, he suggested we follow his moral system. 21 or 22, whatever he was, that took me aback. But this is what the New Atheist movement taught. We can come up with these things, and we need to get rid of religion because it's evil and it's bad and it causes harm. Listen to what the atheist Nobel Prize physicist Steven Weinberg once said. He said, religion is an insult to human dignity. With or without it, you would have good people doing good things and evil people doing evil things. But for good people to do evil things, that takes religion. The agnostic David Berlinski responded to Steven Weinberg in his well-known book, The Devil's Delusion. And here's what the agnostic David Berlinski said. He said, just who has imposed on the suffering human race poison gas, barbed wire, high explosives, experiments in eugenics, the formula for Zyklon B, heavy artillery, pseudoscientific justifications for mass murder, cluster bombs, attack submarines, napalm, intercontinental ballistic missiles, military space platforms, and nuclear weapons. If memory serves, it was not the Vatican. Interesting response from an agnostic to an atheist. David Berlinski is a fascinating person. The New Atheist movement taught us we don't need God, because we're wise enough to understand good and bad on our own. But the interesting thing is that's not what the evidence shows. Several years ago, Dr. Jesse Bering, who was an experimental psychologist, he specialized in evolutionary psychology and human behavior. He would identify himself as an agnostic. Formerly, he was an atheist, but when his mother died, something kind of spiritual or supernatural happened. Couldn't quite explain it, so now he would identify as an agnostic. But he ran an interesting experiment on children. So these children were 5 and 6 and 8 and 9 years old. And this is what he told them. He put them in a room and gathered them into a room and said, here's what I want you to do. You see this dartboard right here? I want you to stand with your back to the dartboard, take this particular dart, throw in your non-dominant hand, so if you're a righty or lefty and vice versa, in your left hand, throw the dartboard, or the dart into the dartboard without looking. And whoever gets the most points is going to get a piece of candy. Now, you know a 5-year-old will do anything for like a Snicker bar, you know what I mean? Right? So they're all excited and they're like, yeah, this is so great. So all that to say, he leaves the child in the room, takes the rest of them out, and doesn't tell the child that there's hidden cameras in the room. So this goes maybe kind of how you might expect, right? They're 5, 6, 8, 9 years old. So they look around and they're like, okay, they grab their little dart, they try it, and they throw it at the dartboard. But it's a little hard to do that, and they start to realize this is really actually quite challenging. So they start to kind of look around and kind of maybe look around the room and realize, well, nobody's really here. So what do you think they do? They take that dart, they run on up, they put it on there, and they run back to their spot. One little girl just like opens the door and looks to see if anyone's in the hallway. You know, that kind of stuff, right? All right, so then the second time Dr. Jesse does the experiment, he brings adults into the room. And he just has them sit in the back and runs the experiment with the child again. But the final time he does it, he introduces somebody very special. And he tells the kids, guys, this time, Princess Alice is going to be in the room. And Princess Alice is special. Why? Because Princess Alice is invisible. You can't see her. And she's going to sit in this chair right up here while you throw your darts at the dartboard. And then everybody leaves. One cute little girl, I think it was a girl, maybe it was a little boy, runs over to the chair while they're alone and like pets it. Princess Alice? Princess Alice? You know, trying to touch Princess Alice, you know? It's a really sweet experiment when you watch it happening. But no surprise to you, what did Dr. Jesse find after running this experiment on hundreds of kids? He found that when the adults or Princess Alice were in the room, the kids were significantly less likely to cheat. Here is what he references. He says Princess Alice is fitting the role of what any supernatural being is believed to do in society. Princess Alice is watching them. Princess Alice cares about their behavior. Princess Alice will probably act if they misbehave. So what does all this mean? So let me tell you what the atheist turned agnostic, Dr. Jesse says, and I quote, he says, an all-seeing, all-knowing, all-powerful, interventionist, moralistic deity, that helps steers people in the direction of good behavior. As a result of his experiments, he comes to a very interesting conclusion. Would you lie to a friend if you knew you were never going to get caught? Would you embezzle $5 million from the bank if you knew you would never get caught? The question isn't, you can't do good things without God. That would be foolish to say. There's plenty of people that do not believe in God or belong to other religions that do plenty of good things all the time. The point I'm making here is not that you can't do good things without God. The question I'm asking is, who are you when nobody is looking? Who are we as a culture, as a people, as a new atheism movement that's telling people we can be morally good on our own? My question, is who are you when you are home alone and you think nobody is seeing what you're doing? That's the role of Princess Alice, watching us and holding us accountable. And I think another great example of this came from the MIT Technology Review. It was an article put out in December of 2021. It was titled, "The Metaverse Has a Groping Problem Already." It mentioned how several women who play in these video games, and in these particular video games, you can create your own avatar, it can look like you, can look like somebody else. So these women create these images, computer images of them, and they're running around in the games playing. But here's what's happening. When you're playing people from all over the world, whoever is maybe logged into that game. And so what they found was happening in these games is the women are playing the games, the men avatars would run over and touch them inappropriately in the game. And the women are feeling a little violated, but it's a computer game, and there's nothing you can do to stop it because there's no controls given to you to stop somebody from doing that. And they're finding that in these video games, because who knows where this person is, anywhere they're living in the world, anywhere that they're playing in the world, they have that sense of autonomy a bit. They're sitting on a couch somewhere, in a chair somewhere. Nobody can catch them. And so they're touching people inappropriately in the video game. So not only do we live in an era where people are not just being physically or sexually harassed, but they're being virtually sexually harassed in a video game. The new atheist told us we could put God out, kick him to the curb, and we will be good on our own. It's not what the evidence is showing us. We aren't as good. We aren't as capable of being as good as we think without knowing somebody is watching, without knowing that our deeds matter, without knowing that there is an intentionality or a purpose behind the good or the bad that we do. So all these actions are easy, video game inappropriate touching, because it's anonymous. And so the new atheists have created this deception. And it is filtered into our culture. Now we can go back even further and look at what the influences of the sexual evolution, all these things. I can't keep going back and back, so I'm just kind of going to focus on the last 20 years and just some of the impacts of the new atheism movement and how they've transformed the culture, taken away from the culture a foundation, an undergirding, told them that you can be free and you will be good, and in fact we're seeing so much of the opposite. And here's another deception that they told us, that we would get right without God. They told us that we would get the life question right. What do I mean by that? Well, let me share with you a little bit about Down syndrome and a particular tweet that Richard Dawkins, the world's most well-known atheist, the atheist god, if I can use that phrase, what he tweeted out years ago. He tweeted, a woman had said something on the lines of, if she was pregnant with a child with Down syndrome, she didn't know what she would do if she would abort it or keep it. It's a real ethical dilemma. Richard Dawkins replied, abort it. It would be immoral to let it be born, essentially. I'm not focusing on abortion here. What I'm focusing in is an interesting word that he used called immoral. You are committing a moral wrong if you allow this child to live. So let me read you just a little bit about Down syndrome and a study that was done by the American Journal of Medical Genetics in 2011. They interviewed 284 people with Down syndrome, 12 years and older, and asked them about their self-perception. They were hoping that their information could be shared with expectant mothers or families with people with babies of Down syndrome, so they knew kind of how to best care for them. So among those surveyed, nearly 99% of people with Down syndrome indicated they were happy with their lives. 97% liked who they are. 96% liked how they looked. 99% with people with Down syndrome expressed love for their families. 97% liked their brothers and sisters. Check that out, parents. 97%. Well, 86% of people with Down syndrome felt that they could make friends easily. When I read this, I was stunned, actually. And the reason why I was stunned is that it says 99% of people with Down syndrome said they were happy with their lives. And 96% liked how they looked. You think if I polled this room right now of God-fearing believers, we would get 99% are happy with their lives, and 96% of us like how we look? Maybe the 4 people that bought new outfits liked how they look. The rest of us are like, well, this still works. I'm clothed, And so I don't even need to tell you all, and I'll talk more about this tomorrow, but I don't need to tell you all about the rise of mental illness in our country and globally, right? Highest levels we've ever had of mental illness right now. The rates of depression, the rates of anxiety, suicidal thoughts, all of these things are high. Additionally, Ipsos, which is a multinational market research consulting firm, conducted a study in 2018. Here's what they found. 79% of Americans report feeling unhappy with how their body looks. 79%. And they have the most dissatisfaction most prevalent when looking in the mirror, 37%. I mean, we all know that's true, right? When at the beach in a bathing suit, 32% of us don't like how we look there. Or when shopping for clothes, 31% don't like ourselves when we shop for clothes. Overall, of the people that were dissatisfied with how their bodies look, 83% of them are women, and 86% are young adults between the ages of 18 and 34. In 2020 in Denmark, 95% of Down syndrome babies were aborted. 95%. In case you thought this was a newer practice or maybe unique to just Denmark, The NIH did a study in 2004, looked across 18 countries across Europe, and showed that 88% of Down syndrome cases ended up in abortion. Across Europe. It's hard to come across statistics here for abortion on Down syndrome babies, but there's been estimates around 67% according to the Atlantic magazine and things like this. So why are we aborting them? For the simple reason that in an atheistic, naturalistic world where all we have is a physical world around us and the physical laws that exist, we then need to determine what is human value and what is human worth, and who should live and who shouldn't, for the simple reason that our survival is important. The survival of our species is important. And when they look at somebody with Down syndrome, they say, well, they can't lead the same life as me. So they're not going to be happy, or they're not going to, they're going to have to drain energy from their parents, or they're going to get money from the government. They're not contributing to the betterment of the human race. Therefore, why should they live? Hence why Richard Dawkins says it's immoral to keep it alive. That's why you're committing a wrong, because you are not doing what's good for species, where survival is key. And so when I read this stuff, and I first learned about 99% of them are happy with their lives, and I look around at all of us, and I think we did our best to determine who should live and who shouldn't live, and all we have done is abort the happy ones. And we're left with us. In our infinite wisdom, because we could figure all this out without God. We don't need him. Get rid of that religion stuff. Watch how good we do. And we got it wrong. We have it wrong. And now we have a mental health crisis that we don't even know what to do with. Our solutions don't seem to be working. Our therapy doesn't seem to be working. Our medications don't seem to be working. People are more medications. We took out that foundation which people built their lives and their worldview on at the cost of people who could have brought us great joy. How can we put this expectation for us as people to be all-knowing? It doesn't make sense. I can't even tell you tomorrow. I can't even tell what's happening in 2 hours from now. How in the world can I make a judgment call like that? And to me, this is the ultimate failure of the new atheist movement, is at the end of the day, they got it wrong. They told us we could figure life out. We didn't need God. And now here's where we find ourselves as a culture. When it comes to truth, it's my truth versus your truth. Truth doesn't even exist. I have my truth, you have your truth. When it comes to freedom, freedom means no boundaries at all. I get to do whatever I want, complete autonomy, when every system in the world that calls itself a free place has to have rules within a system, rules for a system of freedom to exist. You have to have rules in order for there to be freedom. I can't walk up to somebody and just punch them in the face every day and say I'm free. It inhibits your freedom. Freedom only exists within a system of boundaries. When it comes to longevity, we as people in our infinite wisdom are now freezing people because we want to be able to live eternally. So if we freeze them, one day when we figure out how to make them live eternally, we can thaw them out and we can make them live eternally. Love. Now we're saying, forget man and woman, that is so old. Now we can do man on man, woman on woman, and soon to be, I'm sorry to tell you, adult on child. We are deciding who we should love. We are now the arbitrators of that. Life and death. We decide when life should exist, when it should come into existence with abortion, and then we decide when life should end, whether it's euthanasia, whether it's capital punishment, whether it is abortion at the end of life, ending life. And we create life in test tubes. We determine when life begins and when life ends. That's what we do now. Artificial intelligence. Let me read you a paraphrase from an MIT professor. And what they said about AI. She said this, she says, our desire to create machines in our own image has been around since antiquity. It isn't new. Creating machines in whose image? AI and machines are becoming more human. Why? Because we want them to reflect us. When it comes to transgenderism, we don't know if we are male or if we are female. And if I don't like, and I feel like I am something other than I am, well, then I can simply create myself into that other thing because I have that power now. And let alone morality. We've already talked about that. I become the arbitrators of right and wrong. And so now we as a culture, now that we have taken on all of these things, we've become the arbitrator of all of these things, and we are more confused than we've ever been before. We don't know up from down, left to right. We don't know if we're male or female. We don't know anything, and we are so lost. And all it is we have gone back to the garden where the original temptation that Satan threw at Adam and Eve is, you're not going to die. You are just simple. God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be open and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. You'll be like God. So we decide truth. We decide what romantic relationships should be, which was already established back in Genesis chapter 2 with Adam and Eve. We decide, we become the arbitrators of the beginning of life, which God was back in Genesis. We determine whether we're male or female, which God did when it says that he created them male and female. He shaped them and formed them male and female. Now we are shaping and forming ourselves. We took away God and we put ourselves in his place. And this is why you see us in all kind of disarray right now, because we've put on ourselves as a culture, we believe this lie, and put on ourselves as a culture a burden of which we are never going to be strong enough to bear, being God. We are not all powerful, we are not all knowing, we're not all wise, and it's too big of a burden. Now, this isn't new, right? I mean, this idea that, we are constantly always trying to be like God, it's not new, right? I mean, you're going to see this throughout the biblical text and throughout our culture. But it's interesting to me when a prominent leader of the new atheist movement begins to realize the failure of these empty atheist teachings. This is a woman named Ayaan Hirsi Ali. Have any of you ever heard of her before? Okay, several of you. Let me give you just a really quick synopsis of her. She was born in Somalia, raised in Kenya, raised Muslim. While she was in school, she went through female circumcision at a young age. When she was in school, the Muslim Brotherhood came in and basically raised the extremism of Islam to a whole nother level that they were not used to. And she ended up fleeing when she was about to be forced into a marriage several years later, flees to the Netherlands, goes from being a cleaner to making her way through Dutch Parliament, learning the language, and joins the new atheism movement after leaving Islam. She was one of the leaders of the new atheism movement. She spoke with them oftentimes for the last 15 or so years. They loved having her. Number one, she was a woman, and the four leaders are all four guys. One has since passed away. Christopher Hitchens passed away. But it's Sam Harris, Daniel Dennett, Richard Dawkins, and she would speak at many different places. She also knew Islam. And so she could speak against Islam. She wrote a book called Infidel, and she talks about all kind of things pertaining to Islam and the horrendous aspects of it, which is why she eventually left it. And they loved having her. Until last November. When, unknown to me, and I don't know how many people she shocked with this, but she shocked a lot of people when she wrote an article for Unheard in November of last year. And this article was titled, "Why I Am Now a Christian." This woman, who was part of the leaders of this movement, who told us we would be fine, who've been teaching and pushing this doctrine on us, left. Several reasons, but one of them was that the meaninglessness of life as an atheist became unlivable. There's no meaning in atheism. And it was hard for her to continue to live like that. She was heavily influenced by a book by a guy named Tom Holland called Dominion, where he talks about how the undergirdings of our society, human rights, etc., are all Christian principles that we just don't realize that we are borrowing from. That greatly influenced her. And so now she is in the very beginning stages of learning what Christianity is all about. True to their nature, they began to write articles against her, commenting on the fact that she's misguided here and she's misled here. I mean, it was devastating for them to have somebody out of that high level walk away. So why am I a Christian today? Because I've watched our culture live life without God and see it bring nothing but destruction and despair. It's one thing for it to be true factually, I'm an apologist, that's what we do. But it's another to see it work in your life effectively. And I can tell you one thing, guys, if you were going to create a religion, you wouldn't be creating this. You would not be creating a religion that tells you to deny things that make you feel good. You would create a religion that tells you to do things that make you feel good, give you power over somebody else. Get a religion where it tells you that you're better than other people or you can become like God. I'm not convinced really that atheism is something that fully exists. I think we all worship something. It's just that the Christians recognize their God. The atheists just don't have the name of their God written down. But they'll worship science or themselves or other things. So that's what you would do, a religion where you become God yourself. But you wouldn't create a religion that tells you, limit your desires for sex and money and success and all of these things. You most definitely wouldn't create a religion where it says the last will be first, or where the founder of the religion sacrifices himself, not for good people, but for bad people. If you were going to create a religion, you most definitely would not create a religion that tells you to love your enemies. I want to conclude on one story that I think speaks a lot to this. Many of you are familiar or have heard of Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston, South Carolina. It hit the news when a young boy named Dylan went in and shot people and killed people during their church Bible study. Just so you know a little bit about this church, it was founded in 1818 by a free black shoemaker. It stood as a beacon in a port city through which many legions of Africans passed on their way to bondage across the growing nation. It was torched by angry whites after one of its organizers led a failed slave revolt, but it rose from the ashes and served as a stop on the Underground Railroad. Martin Luther King went through there. Booker T. Washington went through there. So this is a beacon of a church. And so when young Dylan Roof, young white man wearing a stained gray sweatshirt and fanny pack, walked into their Wednesday night Bible study and asked for the minister, nobody thought twice. The Reverend Clementa Pickney, Emmanuel's senior pastor, even invited Dylan to take the seat beside him. He wanted him to feel at home and comfortable. He didn't want him to be fearful of anything. This is the house of the Lord, and you are welcome here. Well, it was a small Bible study, thankfully, only about 12 people, and they studied Mark chapter 4, the parable of the sower. That was the focus of the Bible study. And about an hour or so in, we're not really sure exactly all the details there, but at some point Dylan stood up, pulled out his gun, and pointed it at the people. He shot 77 bullets. Remember, there were only 12 people there. He told Polly Shepard that he was going to let her live so she could tell people what happened. 70-year-old woman would later share that with her niece. He was in custody within 13 hours of the shootings. 2 days later, he appeared before a county magistrate in North Charleston courtroom to have bond set. About 4 dozen people, which relatives of the dead are among them, and they turned out to see him at this hearing. I want to read you what Reverend Anthony Thompson did at this particular hearing. It See, when Dylan Roof was brought before the bail hearing, Reverend Anthony Thompson had been reluctant to attend. His wife, Myra, was one of those that was killed that night. And during this whole time in the courtroom, Dylan sat there. He sat there staring blankly ahead. He was in like a different room where he could see the video. He was in a baggy striped jumpsuit. His hands were cuffed behind his back. He couldn't see the crowd, but they could see him. As he stared blankly, as one disembodied voice, he couldn't see them, just heard them, shared with him the lessons they learned in Emmanuel and about their lost loved ones. Well, Anthony Thompson was determined not to speak. He just lost his wife 2 days prior. He wasn't going to say a word, but God told him, get up. So he got up. And he said, God, whatever it is you have to say, you better say it because I don't have anything to say. So come on, don't embarrass me up here. God reminded him that Anthony was his child, that Dylan was his child, and that Anthony was a sinner just like Dylan. And so Anthony's like, I'm saying to myself, you got to be kidding me. I'm not going to tell people I'm a sinner. If that's what you want me to say, I'm going to go sit down, God. But he just kept coming. And so by the time he got to the podium, he was thinking, you know what? I'm a sinner, Dylan, just like you. And I need to be able to forgive him, just like God forgave me. And so he said to Dylan, son, I forgive you. My family forgives you. Ruth kept his gaze down throughout the hearing. But when Reverend Anthony uttered the name of Jesus, he looked right up into the Reverend's face. I was able to really pierce into his eyes, almost into his very soul, and I saw a hurt young man. As he was walking back to his seat, Reverend Anthony's body was shaking. He said, from my neck, my shoulders, my arms, like something was going through my fingers. I could feel something leaving me, but I couldn't see it. And when it was all over, I had this peace like none other. I mean, God took away the burdens I was bearing. He took away the pain I was feeling. He took away the anger and the hate. He just took it away. It was all gone. And so now I know that forgiveness heals. I know what forgiveness can do to a person's life. It changes your life dramatically. Ruth was found guilty and sentenced to death. He's now on death row. But Reverend Anthony has written to him. He says, in the letter, I made him aware of who my wife was so that he can see she was a real person, not just a black person. I want him to know that I forgave him no matter what. And he also told Dylan that he'd be happy to visit him and help him give his life to God if he wanted to do that. But Dylan has yet to reply. Charleston expected violence to erupt on the streets. We'd been seeing this all around this time around the country with various things that were happening around the country with various race challenges that we were having. Yet, when people from other cities came, other states actually came to start a riot, the church told them, don't. We're talking the survivors, the family members. We told them to go back to where you come from. We don't want this here. They said, that's why nothing happened. I found out about the story from a local pastor in Charleston. And when he was telling me the story of how when Reverend Anthony Thompson offered forgiveness, he said to me, he goes, a gentle answer really does turn away wrath. Because they were ready to burn the city to the ground. But that single act of forgiveness saved it. How is it that a book that is 2,000 years old somehow got it right? If you're going to create a religion, you don't create something like that tells you 2 days after your wife is taken from you, go and offer forgiveness. That doesn't make sense in our human minds, but it works. It provides healing. Theologian Dallas Willard once said, because I make my living as a university professor, I'm frequently asked in so many words, why do you follow Jesus Christ? My answer is always the same. Who else did you have in mind? So why am I a Christian, guys? Because in many ways, my answer is similar to the one Peter gave 2,000 years ago. To whom should I go? You, Jesus, have the words of eternal life. How do we engage culture and thrive in faith, guys? We show this culture that there's clarity to their confusion, there's answers to their questions, there's rest for their extreme emotional and mental unrest, and that the truth that can be found and known is actually good and is actually what they want to be true. I'll close us out in prayer. Lord, we just thank you. We're thankful that we have you. The reality is that you change things for us. You change our reality, you change the way we live. And as we watch the world fall apart, Lord, help us to see them through your eyes. To remember that the only reason we're not them is because of you. What we are looking at is who we would be. And maybe that anger that we have towards the fallen, broken world, we can in turn into thankfulness and gratefulness because we know what you have saved us from. May our hearts be one of sympathy and empathy and compassion over the lost, recognizing how lost that they are and how beautiful, how glorious it is to be found. Amen.